President Trump's name is the name that's on the door here. This is his administration. This is the Trump administration, and he believes in these tariffs. He has been firm that he believes in these tariffs. That is not just new. He campaigned on them. Again, he's talked about them for decades, and I think you're going to see him push forward here. I think he is
As promised, let me welcome to the program Matt Terrill, who is a former chief of staff to Marco Rubio, who is now U.S. Secretary of State. He was in that job during the 2016 presidential campaign. Welcome to you, Matt.
Great to be with you.
Hi, thank you for joining us. So there we had, just over the weekend, tough tariffs announced on China one day, then news that they're being lifted the next, and then President says tariff relief is temporary, and we're talking about tech products, of course, in particular. You can understand, though, surely, if American businesses and investors around the world are feeling confused.
Well, look, I think at the end of the day, the administration stands by this being a part of their plan. And to your point, whether it's on tech or pharmaceuticals, recognizing that these are national security issues in many cases, and something that the president's been clear about, wanting to make sure is protected in terms of shoring those, if you will, into the United States. But look, at the end of the day, I think the American people are less concerned right now, are focused on process and more focused on the results. You know, what are the results of these tariffs ultimately going to be? And if it's going to be where, in the eyes of the administration, many Americans, you have fair trade practices. If it's going to be a situation where you have lower prices and producing revenue and a strong economy here in the United States, then that's a win. But at the end of the day, it comes down to what do these tariffs mean? That's what the American people are focused on.
Okay, Matt, but what do you describe as process? We're talking about announcements and then changes in the announcements, then reversals on the announcement, and it has an effect on stock prices, on the markets. 60%, you know better than me, Matt, 60% of Americans have an interest in the stock markets, whether through pensions or just directly holding shares themselves. They're worried about that, or at least a lot of people are worried about that. That cannot be part of the plan, surely.
Well, look, the stock market goes up and down, but the stock market isn't, Main Street. And look, at the end of the day, when you look at Main Street, when you look at consumer prices, you're seeing the prices of energy go down. You're seeing the price of eggs go down. You're seeing inflation come down under the Trump administration, under the second term that is in. So look,
inflation, forgive me, inflation is somewhat up, isn't it, since the president came to office?
We've seen prices go down. You've seen some reports showing that certainly the cost of the consumer is going down. I go back to grocery prices such as eggs. You look at energy costs, oil, for example, going down. So look, at the end of the day, it comes down to what is the impact on the consumer, on the American people. But all that to say, it comes down to the final results of this. And I do think the American people are going to give President Trump time to implement his policies. It's not just tariffs, but his tax plan. Look, there's good news coming out of the House of Representatives, or the blueprint, if you will, for President Trump's congressional agenda, which includes his tax relief, tax cuts that he campaigned on. That's going to be vital for his overall economic plan. The American people will give President Trump time to implement the policies he campaigned on. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, it is argued, isn't it, by some pretty influential commentators that America is squandering valuable trust among investors and among business leaders who want stability to plan their investment and hiring for the future. Now, that trust is priceless, and it is rather being frittered away, don't you think?
Well, look, I think there are going to be some people in the business community, Americans, people around the world, who are going to agree with these tariffs, and some who may not agree with these tariffs. We're seeing that, of course, take shape out there. But at the end of the day, I go back to it's about the results. And if President Trump is able to deliver wins here in terms of negotiating deals with countries, which I think the administration feels very good about doing, if they're able to do that with China in particular, frankly, that's the big one, obviously. Look, at the end of the day, it comes down to, are these tariffs, is this plan going to be successful? The administration and President Trump believes it will be. President Trump has campaigned on tariffs. He's been talking about tariffs since the 1980s. Yes. He genuinely believes that this is the path that is necessary to bring free and fair and balanced trade. That is something that President Trump, I think, stands by. Yeah. It's about the results. Let's see what happens here.
Okay. What do you believe the president's plan is? In China, we're talking about the second superpower, the second economic superpower on this planet, and the economies of America and China, to say nothing of large parts of the rest of the world, are just so profoundly intertwined. And now it is suggested the president really wants to achieve a kind of decoupling of the American and Chinese economy. That's drastic stuff. Does that make sense to you? That is an ambition?
Well, look, I think what makes sense is recognizing what China is. And right now what we're seeing, whether it's with the Panama Canal or other dynamics taking place here, this administration is saying, look, we need to have a policy that's going to make America competitive, that's going to ensure that America remains that economic power, if you will, and has American strength. These are all things he campaigned on. American strength, American prosperity. So when it comes to China, I don't think it's a one-size-fits-all. In fact, these tariffs aren't going to be a one-size-fits-all. They're going to be tailored to individual countries, and you're going to see tariffs tailored to China, as we're seeing right now. So look, at the end of the day, it's not just about the tariffs, though. There are other dynamics at play here. Again, I go back to the Panama Canal. I go back to other things that President Trump campaigned on when it comes to China. Obviously, it's a big issue, big concern among Americans nationwide as it relates to China. So I think to answer your question, we got to wait and see how this all plays out. We don't have all the answers today. It comes down to what is the results going to be. And on these tariffs, I think the American people, majority of them at least, will give the president time to implement his policy on this. It comes down to what is the win? And I think the president feels as though he's going to have a win out of this.
Okay, so while we're waiting for the outcome to demonstrate its value or lack of value, Matt, you are a seasoned observer and commentator. Is your trust in the president's judgment on this absolutely total? Or are you looking to some around him to maybe exercise a constraining influence from time to time, which might be useful? I see those reports, and I'm sure you have too, that the Treasury Secretary, Scott Bessent, threatened to resign. I've heard Anthony Scaramucci suggest that your old boss, Marco Rubio, would be the first to resign. Do you welcome or do you want to see that kind of restraint? Would that be useful in your view?
Well, here's what I think. I think this is a very different administration, Trump 2.0 versus Trump 1.0. In the first term that President Trump had, he didn't trust many of the people around him or respect them, frankly, or know them. He was new to Washington. I think he learned a lot of lessons out of that. This time around, President Trump has built a team in his term surrounded by people he trusts, respects, and knows.
Does he need a bit of restraint in your view or not?
Well, I actually think that President Trump's ear is much closer to the ground right now. I think he's listening more in this second term than he was in the first term. And you're seeing the Secretary of Treasury, Secretary of Commerce, others coming into play here. And I think it's a team effort in terms of shaping this policy. But at the end of the day, to your point, at the end of the day, President Trump's name is the name that's on the door here. This is his administration. This is the Trump administration. And he believes in these tariffs. He has been firm that he believes in these tariffs. That is not just new. He campaigned on them. Again, he's talked about them for decades. And I think you're going to see him push forward here. I think he is confident that this is the right approach, the best course. At the end of the day, let's see what the result is. Let's see how this all plays out. I think he has great confidence. This administration has great confidence in the path that they're going down.
All right, Matt Terrill, former Chief of Staff to Marco Rubio. Thank you so much for joining me on the program.